All right, hello. So in this video, we're going to introduce HTML, which is the main language that we're using to define what web pages look like, not what the content of web pages is, so that browsers can be able to then render it and be able to display that individual content. All right. So what we're going to cover in this video is we're going to cover how to sort of write web files to begin with. We'll begin sort of working through some examples of that. We'll talk about marking up that content with HTML, and then we'll talk about sort of HTML attributes, which is sort of, again, a bit of code syntax we're going to use to describe what kinds of things HTML elements might be. Okay, so the basic idea here is that, as we referred to in the previous video, is that we can take some files, some content, and then have the browser render that and display what it looks like. So what we're able to do is if we take a file, for example, we're going to take a file that we're going to call index.html, and we can go ahead and open that up inside of, actually, I've already done that, right? We can open it up inside of Visual Studio Code. And so we're going to be able to then write our file. So the name of this file, let's talk about this for a second. It's called index.html. So the .html extension is going to be used to tell the computer that this is an HTML style file, right? It's going to have the kinds of content that a browser will display. Similar to how you might have a file that ends in .pdf or .doc or .docx or .jpeg, for example. File extensions are really just used by the computer, by your operating system, to understand like how it should default open up those files. So technically you can call them whatever we want, but we're always going to call them we're going to call them .html files when they're files that contain HTML style code. We're calling the file index because an index file is going to be the sort of the default file that gets offered by a server if you go to any location or any response. So if I, for example, remembering from the previous video, if I go to Wikipedia and I say, hi, Wikipedia, I would like the wiki/informatics resource, then if there's no specific file that's being named there, right? You don't actually say, I want to go to wikipedia.com/index.html. If you don't put anything by default, then the web servers will they'll default to, oh, you must have want the index file, right? You want sort of the starting point, and it's an index, thinking of it like an index in a book, right? Saying, oh, here's a list of all the stuff we're interested in. So generally when we're creating a new website or a new web page, we're going to call those pages index.html because that's going to be sort of the default that servers tend to provide. So in any case, we can take this file, index.html, which I've gone ahead and already created. You can always create new files in VS Code by using the new file menu, just like you would create a new Word document in Word, or any document in any document editor, really. And once we have that, we can go ahead and begin actually writing some content into this file. So we can put, for example, hello world. Which is the traditional first set of words the first thing that you always want to display whenever you're doing any kind of computer programming. It's tradition. We can't violate tradition. But we usually write same content, right? Hello world. It's a really nice day today. Really nice day to read a book, right? We can basically start adding in some content. It's a little bit like you were writing an essay in Word, for example. We can't do any formatting directly, right? We can't make things bold or italics, but we can sort of just write out content as we're going. Okay, note that, again, I haven't saved this file. That's why it's got this solid circle at the top. So I'm going to make sure that I go to File and Save so I can save my work. Once we've written out some content into our HTML file, we've said, hey, here's this content, right? I've written out some text. There's words. That's what I want my web page to display. We're then able to open up that file inside of a web browser, and the web browser will take that content and display it as a web page. So you can the easiest way to open this up is generally to actually take that file, like go find it inside of File Finder or File Explorer, and you can just go ahead and open it with your web browser, right? So I'm right-clicking to use the Open With menu to open it up inside of Google Chrome. And when I do that, it pulls up a web page. I'm going to resize my window here so we can sort of see both pieces at the same time. So I'm going to adjust. Ta-da! So there it goes. It pulls up my web page. Like, check it out. Look, I've got a web page written in my browser. It says, hello world. Hello world. It's a really nice day to read a book. Ta-da! We have a web page. And that's basically, that's the start, right? So if we want to create a file, it's a web file, we want to be able to make a web page, what we're going to do is we'll make our file that we'll call index.html. We put in some content that we want to display on our page. And then we open up the page by double clicking on it to open up inside of a browser. And that then shows us the file that we want to use. All right. Of course, this doesn't look great, right? This is just text. If we want to indicate sort of what it look, we want to provide more detail about how this gets rendered, what it's supposed to look like, what it means, we need to add some more code. We need to have some way of marking this to indicate that I want these things to be different, that I want hello world to maybe be the title, or maybe I want this thing to be a paragraph. We want to indicate what kinds of content this is. And the way that we do that is by using what's called HTML. HTML is an acronym. It stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It is a language, and it's a programming language. It is a way of us describing, communicating some information, namely communicating to the browser how we want things to look. It is called a markup language because we're going to use it to annotate, to mark up, to basically describe textual content. It's a little bit like you can think about if you open up a book and you start like highlighting it, or you start adding notes to the margins, right? Explaining, oh, this is this part is important, reference this here. This talks about line 30, this refers back to page 36. That kind of markup, that way of actually marking up pages, is what HTML is doing. And then the hypertext, because hypertext is for documents that link to one another, that are able to connect to each other through hyperlinks. That's the term we use to describe how web pages connect to each other, and that's what makes web pages web pages. So again, that adds this, HTML's markup is used to add meaning to this plain text. It's used to indicate what's not just that these are words, but what's the purpose of those words. So we use it to indicate things like this is a heading, this is a paragraph, this is a definition, this is a hyperlink, this is an image. We're going to use it to indicate that kind of information. Okay, so the way that we're going to now mark this up, the way that we're going to basically take notes inside of our text document here is by using this language. So we annotate this content by surrounding the content that we want to highlight, the content that we want to mark, with what are called tags. A tag is written with a less than symbol, the name of the tag, and then a greater than symbol. So this becomes here, that's the tag. It's almost, you can think of that's like the start highlighting tag. We then put some content, what the things we want to be highlighting, and then we're going to put what's called an ending tag, which is going to be a less than symbol, a slash, right? Think slash, like cut it off slash, and then the name of the tag again, and then a greater than symbol. So that these things here, this content inside of these greater than less than symbols, that's my tag, that's my start highlighting. And then I've got my content, and then I've got this thing that says, okay, now I'm done highlighting. There's the end of my slash. So what this looks like is and I can sort of give you an example, is that we might say, let's take this hello world and let's annotate this to say that I want that to be the heading. I want that to be sort of the top level heading. That's like the title of my page. And we can do that by surrounding this hello world with an set of H1 tags. So again, here's my opening tag. There's my hello world. That's the thing that I'm highlighting. That's what I'm describing. And then I'm saying, okay, now I'm done describing that. I'm done writing out the heading. That's the end of my content. Similarly, I can put that I want this to be a paragraph, and we're going to use we indicate paragraphs using what's called a P tag. The H1 tag stands for a first level heading, which you can think of as like the title, right? The top level heading of like your table of contents. We'll talk about H1s and we'll talk about heading levels in more detail in a later video. But in any case, here's our paragraph, right? We're just saying I want this text to be a paragraph. And there's the end of that paragraph. You can include a second paragraph. Have you tried Alice in Wonderland? I mean, not read. Have you tried? Have you read Alice in Wonderland? I don't know. You need to pick a random book. So I'm going to save my page, right? So I've saved my file. Now that we've saved this, we've written some content. I've said, okay, I've got my text, hello world. It's a really nice day to read a book. Have you read Alice in Wonderland? I'm indicating that I want this set of content to be a top level heading, and I want this to be one paragraph and this to be another paragraph. Again, I'm surrounding this content with these tags, right? Open tag, close tag, in order to indicate this is what it's going to look like. Now, if I go back to my browser window, right, here's my old text. I'm going to want to hit refresh on my browser. The browser won't automatically change content just because I've written some different code in this file. We have to tell the browser, hey, go request that file and render it again. We're not requesting it from a server, right? We're not doing any server level work, but we basically need to tell the browser, please reload with the new saved content in there. Excuse me. And when I do that, we now get refreshed. I'll make it a little bigger so you can all see it. So you see now that my hello world is big and bold. It looks like a top level title of my page. And you'll notice that It's a Really Nice Day to Read a Book and Have You Read Alice in Wonderland are all distinct paragraphs that are written out on their own lines. Right? Because again, the browser is saying, oh, that needs to be a paragraph. I better put them all out as their own unique individual paragraphs. To be clear, if I don't have the paragraph element, the paragraph tags here, then the browser doesn't realize that these things should be distinct paragraphs. So even though I have line breaks here, I have these sort of extra line breaks, the browser ignores that white space. And the browser just says, oh, you must have just meant for this all to be just text. And yeah, sure, maybe you put some extra spaces in here, but that extra space will get ignored by the browser. It ignores any kind of white space. So we want to make sure that we're putting these things inside of paragraphs so they can be sort of indicating we want these things to be on their own distinct lines because they are their own individual paragraphs. Note that we always write the names of tags in lowercase. It is possible to put the content on its own line because, again, the white space gets ignored. So notice that even if I put my paragraph, I say, here's like, I'm going to start my highlighting. Here's my content. Now I'm ending my highlighting, or ending my paragraph. The web page itself ends up looking exactly the same. In terms of whether you want to indent things, whether you want to sort of put them on their own lines, is a question of what's called coding style. It's about what makes it readable for humans. The browser doesn't care. The browser will interpret it and like be able to understand what you're doing no matter what, mostly. But this is really about how humans can understand and interpret and look at what code you've written and be able to sort of figure out, oh, this is what it probably is going to look like in the browser. There's some more details about this in the course texts and the reading about how to sort of come up with good styling, sort of good spacing and stuff. So I'm not going to go over it in this video, but it's available in that reading. And if there's questions, again, please let me know. Okay. And that's HTML, right? That's the general content. And we come up with, here's some content that I want to display. And then we, what's the content I want to show? And then we annotate it by surrounding it in opening and closed tags. This thing here, if you take your tag and the content, right? So my content and then the tags that surround it, that thing there is referred to as an element, as an HTML element. Think of it as an element, a piece of the web page. So this is an H1 element, which is going to be the H1 part of my page. This is a paragraph element. This is also a paragraph element. These are two distinct paragraph elements, which have different content. One about being a nice day to read a book, and one asking if someone's read Alice in Wonderland. And that's most of HTML. That's about a third of what's involved in writing HTML. When people say they know HTML, a lot of times what they really mean is that they know all the different kinds of elements that can be defined by and understood by the browser. You can't make them up. You can't tag things however you want. In a browser, there's a list of a couple of dozen, actually it might be more closer to like 50 or 60, different elements, different tags that you can use to annotate and mark up your content. In practice, there might be like 60 or 70 of them. In practice, we only use a handful. We only use 10 or 20 at most. You don't necessarily need to memorize them. You will memorize them in the process of just writing out some web pages. But you can always look up what is the right element or the right tag I can use to describe this kind of content. So I have a list of some common kinds of elements, some kind of common content that we might see. So we talked about there's an H1, which is a top level heading. There's also an H2, which would be a second level heading. For example, I can add in an H2 for my favorite books. And again, I'm writing out the content, my favorite books, and I'm surrounding it in my open tag and my close tag. There's my second level heading. You can see that it is slightly smaller, a little bit less bold. Well, it's the same boldness, a little bit slightly smaller, because it's like my second level heading. It's like my subheading, my subtitle. When we think about headings, we're thinking about almost like table of contents level headings, right? So this would be like my chapter name. This would be like my subsection, my section name. We can use anchor elements. Talk about those in a second. Those are hyperlinks. We can include images. We'll go over that in a second. We can make buttons if we wanted to, right? A button They click me. Here's an example of what this looks like. All right, there's a button. You can click it. It doesn't do anything, but we can make buttons appear. We can make lists. We can make tables. We can make forms. We can make divisions, sections of content. We can basically break these things up together. So again, there's lots of these different elements. We will cover a number of them as we go through the course. Don't feel that you need to suddenly immediately learn them all. Start with the really basics, H1s, paragraphs. That's a really good place to begin. Some other things that we can do. Let's see. We can have some elements that can be, we can use, for example, an EM element is an emphasis element. So if we take some content like I'm special and we emphasize it, we put an emphasis EM around it, so we're making it into an EM element. That will make it look italicized. So it'll emphasize it. It makes it look special. And so again, that's one of our ways we can, oh, there it is. There we can emphasize our content. Okay. So again, using different HTML elements is like half of the language. That's half of the syntax of the different kinds of code we need to define what a web page looks like. What you can really think about doing is every web page you've ever looked at is really just going to be a set of content of text and then HTML elements indicating and marking up what that text means and what that text does. Okay. The second piece of syntax that's used in HTML is that for each of these elements, so for my H1 element, my paragraph element, my H2 element, my emphasis element, we can include what are called attributes in order to give options or further meaning to that element. For example, let's have a hyperlink. So let's have some text that's going to be the iSchool homepage, right? That's the text that I want to see. Yeah, we'll do that. That'll work fine. Actually, I'm going to put it up here just because it's going to help me out. I'm going to put it up here in the middle. Right. So there's my text, iSchool homepage. If I want this to be a hyperlink, or I want to be able to click on it to take me to the iSchool's homepage, I can annotate it by using an anchor element that says it's a hyperlink. Anchors, because if you think about the sort of like you're sailing the World Wide Web, right? Sort of the sea of information, you drop an anchor to say, here's where I want to go to. I think, I'm not really sure what the label is, but A elements are anchors. That is what that stands for, and it really is hyperlink. Cool. So again, we've marked it as a hyperlink, but that doesn't tell us that where it links to, right? All we've said is I want this to be a hyperlink, but we haven't said how to get to where we want to go. So the way that we do that is we include additional attributes. So for example, we can take, the way we define an attribute is we're going to write the name of the attribute, followed by an equals symbol, followed by what we want the value of that attribute to be. So for an anchor element, we can give it an href attribute. Href stands for hypertext reference. That's going to be our way of describing where we want our anchor element to go, what hyperlink does it reference? Where do we want this to go? And then the value, right, the thing we're going to put after our equal symbol is we can then put what's the URL we want to access. So in this case, https://iSchool.uw.edu. Once we've done that, if I refresh my page, you'll notice that now this looks like a link. It's purple, it's underlined because it's a link that I visited it. When I mouse over it, it gives me the little thumb, the finger pointer. And when I click on it, it takes me to the iSchool's homepage, right? It is now a hyperlink. We can include multiple, and that's the basic idea of attributes, right? We're providing extra information. So I'm not just saying that the words iSchool homepage is a hyperlink. I'm saying it's a hyperlink, and here's where that hyperlink goes to. Attributes provide these extra bits of information. So there's lots of different kinds of examples of attributes we can include. So as I said, we've already done the example with the anchor, the hyperlink. So again, we can take our text, iSchool homepage, and I can say I want that to be a hyperlink, and here's where it goes to. That the attribute says it's a hyperlink that goes to here, right? Provides an extra set of information. We can do the same thing with images if I want to include an image. So I can include an image element. Images, they take a source attribute. SRC is how we abbreviate the words source, which basically says, where do I want that image to come from? Let me go ahead and I got my file here. I'm going to go ahead and put in I'm going to paste myself in here an image file. So I've got my husky.jpg. It's inside of an image folder. We'll talk about files. Actually, I'll take it out of the folder for a moment. I'll make it easier to work with. So if I want to show my husky.jpg image, I can include husky.jpg, right? That's the image that I want to display. Spelling everything right? Nope, no E in husky. And then with images, we're actually going to include a second attribute as well. Notice that if I want to include multiple attributes, right? So I've got one's called source, and here's equals to what that's equal to. I can include a second attribute called alt, and here's what that's equal to. There's no comma or anything between them. I just put a space to indicate sort of here's the end of one attribute, space, here's the next attribute. So I can put my alt, which is going to be my alternate text. That's going to be text that's going to be available for screen readers or other systems used by people who are blind, to indicate if you can't see the image, what content should be read, what should they sort of understand instead. And this could be a cute puppy. Is that what this is? Oh, why did you not run? Okay, so I refreshed the page and notice it didn't show up. That's a bug. That's an error. That's okay. We get that all the time, right? We always make kinds of mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. I'm making a mistake in front of a live demo, and I'm not editing the video because I want to show you how the mistake happens. So what we can then do is I might look to see, like, okay, I made my image didn't show up, which generally, but it still says that there's like a cute puppy, right? And we can still see the broken link icon, the broken image icon, which means that my image tag was working okay. It's probably just my source that's incorrect. So if I go look, oh my gosh. If I go look at my file here, well, notice that my file is named husky.jpg, P-E-G-O. They spelled JPEG with an E. So I need to make sure I've named that file correctly. File extension names matter because, again, that's how the computers can know which file you're talking about. You'll likely want to, if you're doing any kind of coding or any kind of development, you'll want to be able to make sure you're displaying and showing all of the different file extensions. You want to make sure your computer is not hiding those. I don't have a link to be immediately available, but in Mac and Windows, there's basically ways to go into the settings to be able to say, always show file extensions. That's a really good option for being able to manage through these files. All right, so we fixed that name. Ta-da! There's my really cute puppy, and he looks great. Cool. We can also do things like indicate a language for an HTML page. We'll talk about this one in a second. For example, we can indicate that we want our document to be in English. This is useful for browsers. For example, if you ever visit a web page and then the browser says this page is in Spanish, would you like to translate it? The reason the browser knows that page is in Spanish is because there's something in the HTML in the content that said, I am indicating that this content is in Spanish as opposed to in English. Okay. So there, as I said, there's dozens of different HTML tags, so different elements. Each tag supports and allows for a number of different attributes. So you can put a source attribute on an image. You can't put a source attribute on an anchor. Anchors take an href, but you can't put an href on an image, right? It's like you have to match them to the right element, and it's not standardized because HTML is not written cleanly. It's kind of a mess we have to deal with. So as we go through the course, we'll sort of learn a couple of different attributes that we want to add to individual elements to achieve different effects. But again, you don't need to know every single attribute. You don't need to know every single element. And if you want to figure out sort of what's going on, you can always look these things up in documentation, in textbooks sort of later to learn more about how this all works. Okay, cool. The other thing that we can do with HTML that you might notice is that you'll see that like my image is all on its own line and it's right next to the I'm special, right? Even though I've listed these two things out as like distinct lines, the browser is treating them as being in this part of the same paragraph, or they're part of the same block, the same set of content. What we're able to do with HTML is that the content of any HTML element, so the thing inside of any individual tags, can be text, But that text can also then be further annotated. It can contain other elements inside of it. So for example, I could have my H1 element whose content is the words hello with emphasis world. But then my with emphasis, I could say I want to highlight that in as well by saying I want to open up my EM, start my EM highlighting. This is an EM element, and then close my EM sort of further down. So this means this whole thing will be in H1, but only these words will be emphasized because they're the only part of it that's been sort of marked as being said with emphasis. So I can show you what that looks like in text with emphasis. Right. This part, these words are emphasized. We can then, of course, do that to all kinds of pieces. We could say that I want my anchor element here to be inside of a paragraph. Right? So I say, okay, I have a paragraph. That paragraph's content is an anchor element. That anchor element's content is the words iSchool homepage. Which doesn't change anything it looks like because we've already sort of indicated that we want that to be a paragraph. Similarly, I could put the I'm special inside of its own paragraph, and I could put the image inside of its own paragraph as well. And then now I've indicated the words I'm special are their own paragraph, and the image is its own paragraph. They're going to show up on distinct lines. They're going to be sort of one on top of each other because I'm indicating that each one is its own paragraph. We can, of course, have this go even further. So, for example, if I want this word I'm special, if I want the word special to be further emphasized, I could, for example, use the strong element, which is to say I want this to be strongly emphasized, which makes it bold. It's a bit hard to see in the browser, but basically that's going to say it's going to make it so it's both italicized and now it's also bold because not only is it emphasized, it's strongly emphasized. So it's italicized and bold. So the idea here is that we can nest these elements together. And I mean, I can put one element inside of another element, inside of another element, inside of another element, and I can actually keep that going as far as I want. And that's how most HTML works, is we're actually going to write lots of content, but it's all going to be sort of nested inside of itself, almost like containers inside of containers inside of containers, right? We're going to keep putting these elements inside of one another in order to sort of build out our entire web page. Cool. That said, as we're building this together, it's actually really easy to make mistakes, right? I've always shown we can make mistakes by getting my image URLs wrong. It's often easy to make mistakes with elements and with tags, particularly as you start nesting these things together. So for example, if I include a paragraph, I never make mistakes. So let's see, we'll put it right here. Let's put it right here. We'll put it at the top. So this paragraph says, I never make mistakes. So we say we want never to be strongly emphasized. If I view this in my browser, you'll notice that I never make mistakes, but the word never make mistakes, that's all bold, as is the it's a really nice day to read a book. Have you read Alice in Wonderland? Like the entire rest of the page has turned bold. The reason that's happened here is because I didn't actually close this tag, right? I said, start making things strong, write the word never. And then I didn't say, stop making them strong, stop making them bold. I just said, start making them strong again. And once I've said, start making it strong again, the browser will keep saying, oh, you want things to be in bold? That's fine. It'll go ahead and just keep everything being bold all the way down the page as far as it needs to go. So if we want to fix this, we need to make sure that we've closed that tag, right? We've used that slash to say, that's the end of my element. That's the end of my strong element. And once we do that, we go back to saying the I never make mistakes. Then we can start asking again about whether it's a nice day and how you want to read Alice in Wonderland. Okay. Again, it's very common to make these kinds of mistakes. You'll see this even in the wild on actual web pages. You see it in blogs a lot where people forget to close a tag and suddenly their entire, like they're writing some content, suddenly their entire page turns like a giant hyperlink because they forgot to close an anchor element somewhere. It happens. And if that happens, you go in and say, oh, where did I want that to end? And make sure you've included your slash. Okay. As another example of us nesting elements and how we can make this work is that we can create things like lists. So we can create an element. Now I'm going to put this down. I'm going to put it under my favorite books. So here's my UL. So a UL is an element that stands for an unordered list. Unordered list, as opposed to an ordered list, which is an OL. But a UL element stands for an unordered list. Inside of my unordered list, I can then include LI elements, which stands for list items, right? So basically I'm saying that, hey, I'm going to describe a list, and inside that list, here are the different things that go inside my list. So my favorite books can be Alice in Wonderland. It could be, how about the Iliad? Spelling wrong. I think it's Iliad. And another good book. I'm looking around. We'll go two for the moment because I can't think of another one. I want to say is my favorite book at the moment. Sure. Well, Gulliver's Travel. We'll just go with like classics off there sitting on my shelf. Western white people classics, sure, but classics. So again, what this looks like is that I've now created a list, and because each list item is listed in as a bulleted point. Cool. If I made this into an ordered list, then it lists them out in order with numbers. We can use an ordered list. Right. So again, this is where I have elements that are inside of other elements, right? Unordered lists contain list items inside of them. Similarly, my list items can include other paragraphs and other content and other elements, including, for example, other lists. So if I want to paste this item out, this whole example out here, these are birds, not books, but that's fine, right? We can see that I've got my list of birds, and then out of swallows, I then have an ordered list inside of that other list to nest these things together. So what ends up happening with the HTML is you end up getting sort of structuring it in this kind of way in order to be able to then try to read and understand what this means. Like saying, oh, I'm now defining a list, and here's the list of things that I'm actually including inside my list. This text up here, this one that's shown up in green and has this kind of funky arrows in front of it, this is what's referred to as a comment. So I know that I've said that HTML is like marking up text, and it's writing down like notes, scribbling notes in your book, right, around your words. A comment is like not marking up and saying, what do I want this text to mean? It's basically a way of providing extra details or information to whoever might be looking at your code and your code later. Comments are written inside of this special kind of tag that looks like a less than symbol, an exclamation point, and then 2 dashes. Anything that's a comment, here, I'll write some comment. So these are very Western books. Right? Anything that's listed as a comment will not be actually shown by the browser, right? So I wrote out these words. These are very Western books, but that doesn't show up in my browser anywhere. That doesn't show up anywhere in my page. Comments are used to basically provide extra information to whoever's reading any human being who's reading your code later. They don't actually change what the browser displays, but they're useful about saying like, oh, right here, this is what I'm talking about, or like letting people know. It's almost like providing like little clues and notes to why you wrote the code the way you did. We don't use a lot of comments in HTML. It's not super necessary. Usually HTML is already sort of explaining what it is, but they can be useful to help explain, organize what you're doing. If you find this thing hard to type, that's okay. There is a shortcut that you can use in Visual Studio Code. If you hit Command on a Mac or Control on Windows, and then the slash, which is sort of like I'm going to like a special mode here. If you use the slash, I can comment out a line of code. So for example, if I just go and hit Command and then a slash, it brings me out the comment, so I can now write in a comment. It also means that if I select some code, so like, for example, I'm going to highlight this block of code. If I hit Command and slash, it will surround that block of code in a comment symbol. It's commenting that code so that now it's no longer included in my page. It's now no longer rendered. This is referred to as commenting out some code. It's really useful because it means you're not deleting it, right? So it's still there and you can always get back to it later, but now it's not being displayed. It's kind of been like, it's like you're temporarily removing it. So commenting out code is a really good tool for figuring out like how you want things to look or sort of for experimenting in different ways. Similarly, if I then highlight this whole thing again and I hit the same button, right, command and then a slash, I can uncomment it. I can take the comment away to get back to the content that I wanted. Okay. So that's the basic idea, right? We're writing out HTML. We're taking text, we're annotating it in tags, we're adding attributes to indicate details for these elements, for these tags. And then we nest these things together to sort of indicate the entire structure of my document. Now, HTML, when you're writing HTML stuff for the web, while this works, right, it's showing up in a browser, it's not technically formatted correctly, right? It's not actually structured in such a way that the browser is going to be able to, that all browsers are going to be able to interpret this code and be able to make sure it always renders exactly the way I want. So when we're creating HTML documents for the web, right, things we want to do them for, there's actually a whole structure of HTML that we need to include before we can actually write all of our content. So the overall HTML structure looks like this. What we're going to do is we're going to include an HTML element. Right, so here's my HTML element, which indicates that this is my page that's written in HTML. And we'll even indicate that it's language, right? Say that I want this to be English language at English language page. Ignore all this stuff for a moment. Ignore for a moment. Inside of my HTML, I'm then going to include what's called a body element. The body element contains all of the content of my page. So the HTML says, hey, here's a new page that I'm making. And the body says, here's what I want to display. So all of my content here, right, all this stuff goes inside the body. If you highlight a bunch of text and you hit command and then a bracket, the sort of the square brackets, less leather, the close or open, you can indent things one way or another. So I'm going to use that to sort of fix within my code, my indentation. So again, I now have my body that contains a whole bunch of content. If that seems really long, that's okay. In Visual Studio, if you hover over the gutter here, right next to my elements, do you see how we get these little drop-down arrows? You can actually use that to collapse content, right? It doesn't delete it, it just hides it. So now I can say, oh, here's the body, and the body's got a bunch of stuff inside of it, but we are sort of hiding what that looks like, so I don't need to pay attention, I don't need to worry about the moment. That can be really useful for things like lists, where it'd be like, I got an unordered list, but I don't want to see all the content for the moment. I want to sort of hide it and make it not visible to me as the editor. Everything still shows up in the browser just fine. It's just that we're hiding it from me to like be able to read it, right? Sort of like don't look at this thing at the moment. All right, so all of my content goes inside of the body. Right, so again, HTML, we declare a language, our HTML document, because that's our web page we're making, and then my body has all of the shown content. Web pages do get one other special thing that goes in front of the HTML. This is what's called a doc type. And you write out the word doc type and HTML. This isn't technically an HTML element, it's actually a browser directive. It's basically a way of telling the browser that when it sees this file, right, when it downloads this file from the server and says, I need to show this file, it's telling the browser, hey, this file you grabbed is an HTML file. It's not a text file, it's not a Word file, it's not a PDF, it's not an image. It tells you this is an HTML file, no matter what the file extension needs to be. So even if the file is called .html, this is our way of telling the browser, no, this thing we're about to read is an HTML element, HTML file, and here's the HTML element that has the content you want to display. The other thing that, so inside of my HTML element, I can put the body. That's almost it. There's one other element that can go inside of my HTML tag, and that other thing is called the head. So I can get my body, and I get my head. So there are two things, two elements that go inside of HTML, and that's it. You can never have more than two. Never more than those two. That's the only thing that ever goes inside of HTML. Everything else needs to go inside of either head or inside of body. The head is a little bit like the The head includes metadata. It includes information about the web page that isn't actually shown in the browser. Well, it's not shown in the body, the content of the browser. It's a little bit like how if you ever take a Word document or a PDF document and you click on it, right-click on it and look at the properties, and it tells you things like when it got last edited, who changed it, what the last name was, what the icon is, that metadata, that information about the file itself. You can specify a lot of that inside of the head, even though the head isn't actually shown content. The most common thing you'll see in the head is what's called a title. So this is going to be my page title. All right, this is going to be I'll call it HTML demo. That's the name of my title. And that's going to be the title for my web page. Now notice if I refresh my page here, you'll notice that my content doesn't actually have the words HTML demo in it, right? This thing here, everything inside the browser itself is the body. And the body doesn't have that content, right? That content was written in the head. So my H1, my top level heading is hello with emphasis world, but I've indicated I want my page's title, the metadata title, to be HTML demo. Where that shows up in the browser is actually in the tab here, or it shows up in the bookmark, right? If you look to see what files you've bookmarked, that'll give you a list of all the name that goes to that file is going to be the name that goes in the title. So it's a little bit like saying it's almost like saying here's the file name, but it's not really the file name. It's a way of saying here's the title of the page, but not necessarily the title that you see on the page. The title that you see on the page is going to be our top level heading, our H1. The title is going to be the thing that sort of we're naming the page as metadata inside the tab. Okay, it's title in our tab. We can also include additional meta information. The most common one that you should always include is called a care set meta, which is basically telling you how we want to encode the letters in this. Like basically, how do we convert this into the zeros and ones into like the digital signals that the computer understands? We're going to use UTF-8, which you write out as UTF-8, which basically says that we want to be able to support non-English language characters, right? We want to be able to support more than just the stuff you see on your keyboard. We also want to be able to support Chinese characters, Arabic characters, accents from French and Spanish. We want to be able to include all that stuff as well. So we're going to make our care set UTF-8, which I think actually can be written as, which I think actually is often written as lowercase, so it doesn't really matter too much. Okay. You can also include things like a content, your name, if you want to include who the author is. And again, we're providing a meta element. We're giving it a name to say what meta we're providing. This is going to be the author type element. And then the content saying what you want your name to be. So, for example, I could include this could be my meta. The name could be author. That's what kind of metadata I'm providing. Providing metadata, author metadata. And then the value, the content, sorry. The content could be, that's who wrote the page. And again, we don't see those words, right? We don't see Joel Ross showing up in the body of my page anywhere, but it's now included in the metadata for things like search engines, for things like indexers, right? They'll sort of let us know that that's who wrote this page, so it shows up in that way. And that's your overall structure for your HTML page. Anytime you make a web page, you're basically going to start off with that template, right? And it's going to look exactly like this. You can copy and paste this into every HTML file that you start with, and that'll be good to go. It'll get you going with what you need. You can find a copy of this template in the course textbook, in the Info 340 course text. And I have a link here in the slide if you want to copy that in. But it's also linked from the from Canvas as well. But that'll then get you the template you need to actually get started in order to build out your web page. And that's HTML. That's actually the entirety of the language. So again, we've covered HTML in whatever, about an hour, how long it's taking us. Again, when people say they know HTML, what they really mean is that they know all the different tags that can exist, or they know lots of them, and they know how to combine them in interesting and complex ways. But there's really not that much to it. Again, if you really focus on the ones that are really important, H1s, paragraphs, emphasis, links, hyperlinks, lists, that'll get you 80-90% of all the HTML you'll ever need to write for anything. So there you go. That works on HTML. In the next video, we'll talk about starting to add in some CSS, how we can begin styling it, how we can sort of make stuff look a little bit nicer.